Hi, I'm Loon Cassell, a brand designer and brand strategist that loves talking all things branding, storytelling, aesthetics, and psychology. Have you ever started a brand that you were head over heels in love with, only for 6 months later, a year later, 3 years later, to realize that it doesn't really fit you anymore, that it doesn't feel right, that you want to rebrand? I've been building brands for over 15 years, and I have gone through that experience many, many times. It got to the point where people in my life weren't asking me how my business was going, they were just asking me, "What business are you doing now?" And every time I changed what I was doing in my brand, every time it grew and evolved, I felt really guilty. Because society teaches you that you should do one thing forever. You should get in one relationship, in one marriage. You should have one career, one forever home. And if you start a business, it better last for at least 100 years. So every time this feeling came up where I was like, I want to change this brand, it's no longer feeling like me. Every time I found myself showing up in my brand and feeling like I was playing a part or a character, I felt this immense guilt surrounding it. And it wasn't because the brand was no longer shiny and new and that it had tarnished and dulled. It was because something within me had changed. It took me a while to realize that it wasn't a character flaw and that it actually was something happening in my psyche. This is what I'm now referring to as brand reflexivity. It's the idea that we create brands that represent some part of ourselves, and in doing that, we're able to see ourselves in a new light. Your brand becomes a giant mirror. It's a reflection of all that you are. All of a sudden, you create this giant mirror that reflects back to your values, your beliefs, your aesthetic, your personality. Every piece of your brand is saying something about you. From your graphics, your images, your products, your services, the way you conduct customer service, the experience you give your customers, all of it is saying something about who you are. And because you have that giant mirror turned towards you at all times, you are able to recognize immediately when things feel off or disconnected. And you might not know it in that moment. You might not be able to put it into words, but you'll feel it because it will start giving you an identity crisis and you'll start thinking, what have I done? This is not me. Was it ever me? And then you will say, I need to rebrand. So when you take in new influences and interests in your personal life, or when you get new ideas for how you want to grow as a human being, or alternatively, when you realize that your brand has to grow in a new direction, that's where that disconnect happens and that feeling really occurs. Brand reflexivity is the idea that you and your brand are tied together. Every time you change a little in your personal life and your brand no longer reflects that, that means that you feel like you need to change your brand. And then once you finally have your brand aligned with who you are now, suddenly your brand has to shift a little. And then you find yourself no longer matching your brand. And you think, oh, well, I need to level up in order to match that. And it's this constant loop, a constant cycle of growing and evolving, where a lot of people are only able to look at themselves in small doses when they get home from work and they look in the mirror and think, I want to do some personal development. I want to work on myself. Brand owners are constantly seeing themselves and their skill sets and their talents and their ambitions reflected back to them in real time. So it makes sense that we would look at that and look at ourselves and think something has to change. Next time you start experiencing that feeling that you have an identity crisis and your brand no longer matches who you are, and oh my gosh, what have I done? Was I lying to myself this whole time? Take a breath. There's nothing wrong with you. It's a natural psychological phenomenon that everybody experiences. But like I said, brand owners really experience this to a greater extent. Brand reflexivity ensures that our brand and who we are as brand owners is always evolving and always changing. Pay attention when that feeling occurs, when you start having that mini identity crisis and your brand is no longer lighting you up the way that it did before, because this is a huge indication that either you or your brand has grown and that one or the other of you have to catch up. All you have to do is get realigned, grow and evolve together, because the truth is brands are not stagnant, just as humans aren't. If this is something that's interesting to you and you want to hear more about it, I did write a blog post all about brand reflexivity that you can read, and I will link it below. Let me know in the comments if you've personally experienced this so it can serve as a reminder to all of us that we are not alone in having these mini identity crises as brand owners.